Look, she's obviously going to do better than the corpse of Joe Biden, but she, of course, was deeply unpopular as vice president. They were joking about her when it came to her mystical garbage word salads. Let's be honest, was her candidacy really dead on arrival?
Yeah, I do. I think that's true because of the economic situation in the United States, which she had a hefty hand in creating in the first place. They created this inflation. It did not have to happen. They took office and they started spending like drunken sailors, and it was not to solve the pandemic. They just used that as an excuse. We'd already dumped trillions back into the economy to help people suffering from the pandemic. They continued keeping that spigot on. And then they shoved this multi-trillion-dollar bill down our throats called the Inflation Reduction Act, which Biden would later admit was an obvious misnomer. It had nothing to do with solving inflation. It was all his green energy agenda items, which are very expensive and don't work. And when people were saying, we need relief on this inflation, we make 30 grand a year and prices are up 18%. We can't pay our rents. We can't pay our mortgages. We can't pay our heating bills. What we were told was, you're wrong. It's not happening. First it was, oh, it's Russia's fault because of the Ukraine war. Then it was, it's not happening. Then it was, okay, it's happening, but you should be grateful for it because in some way it's good for you, or just suck it up. You're really just bitching about not being able to buy your latest Peloton. And that's why those guys in hard hats, like the ones behind me at that speech, wound up so disaffected and angry. Like, I know what's in my bank account. I know I can't afford $9 milk. I am not making it up. And so she started off hobbled to begin with because of those circumstances she helped create. And the same is true on immigration. They created it all. By design, by executive order, they undid all the protections Trump had in place. They wanted to open the border, and they got exactly the chaos they desired. They let 10 to 20 million illegals in this country who went to community after community and ruined the American experience for so many citizens, and killed and raped and molested children. This is not hyperbole. This actually has happened over the past 4 years. And then when asked, why did you do that? Finally, you pushed some lame immigration bill 3.5 years into your administration. Why didn't you do anything before? She just kept saying, well, I am going to talk to you now about what needs to be done, but it hasn't been done, but it needs to be done, and it's going to be done. That literally was her answer. So I think all of that set her up to fail because the policies were so disgusting and destructive that even an Obama-like politician would have had a serious uphill climb. But she's absolutely talentless as a politician, and that was on full display for the past 108 days.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier in the show. You know, in the same way that people, give up sugar or alcohol, tea, cigarettes, whatever, I reckon that for an awful lot of Americans, they've given up on a type of media that lazily we've called the mainstream media for a while. They're not the mainstream media. They're the old school media. They're the access media. They're the narrative media. They're the dominant media, because they, of course, did everything they could during this campaign to scandalise every little thing about Donald Trump. The reality was that was nowhere near where people were in this country. Now, that doesn't mean Trump is perfect and must be, covered like a North Korean leader. But am I right in feeling that for a lot of people, they're just done? They're done with the media and they're never going to interact with it again. They're going to get their news from people like you in places like YouTube.
That's exactly right. That's one of the most gratifying parts of today, is that the leftist media is realizing they don't control the conversation anymore. We're not listening to them anymore. The American populace did not buy that he is Hitler or a fascist or a white supremacist or any of the nonsense. 10 years ago, I think the media could have pushed this narrative much more effectively. There was not as much competition. They were dominant. They had a monopoly over the sharing of news. And now it's a whole new world. And that is why you're seeing some of the reaction from people like Jen Psaki over on NBC, who's formerly of the Biden White House, saying what we really need to do is crack down on these alternate forms of information who need to be regulated just the same way we are. Those of us who have these very high standards where we push Russian collusion hoaxes, they need to rise up to our standards if they're going to be this important contributor to the national conversation. Well, you know what, Jen? You don't control that. You didn't win anybody that could govern us. And by the way, even if you did, you couldn't, because there's this pesky thing called the First Amendment. What you're feeling is panic at the loss of power and control. And you should be feeling that because you've had it for far too long and you did not wield it responsibly. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the future of media for a long time has been individual relationships between consumers and I think individual news figures or podcast hosts, whomever you find trustworthy. And most people have a diet of a couple or a few. And it is not these corporate controlled entities that push their agendas on you from above. And they've never been so weak and non-credible as they are today. And that's yet another victory of the Trump win.
Let's look into the future. What is the number one thing that you are most excited about the early days of a Trump term?
Close the border. Close the border. As concerned as I am for our girls' sports, and it's right up there, almost my top issue, but the border's number one. People are dying. I mean, these are bad guys who are crossing that border, from terrorists to criminals to rapists, and they cannot be allowed to keep coming in here like it's a sieve, because once they get in here, we never get rid of them. And that's my number two most excited. That's the number two thing I'm most excited about, which is the deportations. Not of the guy who came 10 years ago and married a woman and they're living peacefully. That guy's not going to get deported. It's of the bad guys who have come here criminally, who get caught, and then they're not deported, and they're not even handed over to ICE, because we have these sanctuary cities that won't cooperate, all of which Trump is going to crack down on. He's promised that he will. Those people need to be sent back home or out of the country. We need to go full Aussie on them. You guys understand how not to deal with these people, and we need to take a lesson. And I think President Trump is committed to it, and I can't wait to send them back to Venezuela. So if they want to commit more crime, they can do it in their country of origin and not in our towns and cities and at the expense of our kids. It's a disgrace that Biden and Harris let this go on as long as they did. My only concern and hope is that we changed power in time to undo it.
Megyn, thank you for taking us on this journey. As we think at times we're walking on eggshells, but the reality was the American people were headed only in one direction, and it's the direction that thankfully you and I have been talking about for a very long time. We love you, darling. I look forward to seeing you again next week back in the Man Cave.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's a glorious day. Enjoy Washington, D.C., and enjoy what feels like the dawn of a new day and freedom. I mean, ironically, that was her motto, but it's what Trump is going to restore in the United States of America. God bless. God bless the USA.
Megyn Kelly, you can find a show on SiriusXM or go and find it on YouTube.